Before we start, let me just say you can download the tab and backing track for this video using the link below. If you're into blues guitar, but you're still getting your head around how it all works, then I'm about to explain all the key concepts you need to know. If you stick with me to the end of this video, then you're going to understand what chords to use and how to play classic rhythm patterns like this. And then we'll look at what scales you need for solos, and I'm going to give you some great licks that you'll want to use all the time, like this. But just in case you're watching and thinking, I know a lot of this already, then I'm going to throw in some pro tips along the way to keep it interesting. So let's kick off with chords and rhythm. I, IV and V. You'll see these characters a lot, but what on earth do they mean? Well, these are just the Roman numerals we use in music for 1, 4 and 5, the chords that most blues is built around. Now there's a really simple pattern we can use so we always know what these three chords are, which looks like this. So, wherever we start on the low E string, like this A here at the 5th fret, from there we can play an E-shaped bar chord, and that will be our 1 chord, so in this case, an A. Then all we do is go up at that same fret to the A string, so here, 5th fret of the A string, and play the A-shaped bar chord, which here will be a D, and this is our 4 chord, and then simply up 2 frets from there, play the A-shaped bar chord again, and we have an E chord. So this pattern tells us that A, D and E will always go together as 1, 4 and 5 in blues. Now this pattern works in any key. For example, if we start at the 8th fret here, we get a C, so now C is our 1 chord, then up to the A string, an F, so F is the 4 chord, and then up 2 frets we get a G as our 5 chord, so C, F and G will always go together. Just for reference, these are the 1, 4 and 5 chords in the main keys we use for guitar, and you probably know already from experience that these chords fit together. Now most blues is in a major key, but for a minor blues it would be based around that exact same pattern, but played as A minor, D minor and E minor for example. Now on their own, these chords don't sound much like blues, but we can change that really easily by simply making each one a 7 chord. So to play a chord as a 7, take your normal E-shaped bar chord, like this A here, and simply remove your little finger. This adds a flat 7 to the chord, in this case a G natural, and you will immediately feel the chord sounds a bit more bluesy. 7 chords like this occur in virtually all Western music, but mostly on the 5 chord. But by making every chord in the progression a 7 like this is a fundamental technique unique to blues. So we can move this up to our 4 chord of D, up here, and then up to our 5 chord of E, and play them all as 7 chords. Of course we could play the D and E using the A shape, like this. Now listen. Already it's sounding like blues. Now the first pro tip for any more advanced players is consider adding extended harmony to your blues chords. For example, instead of playing a D7 like this, we could play it like this, which brings an E into the chord, making it a 9 chord. But then we could even add a B on top of that, up there on the high E string, to make it a 13 chord. In a moment we'll look at chord progressions, but let's just quickly talk about how we play these chords in terms of rhythm, and blues is typically played with swing. To demonstrate this, let's look at probably the most commonly used blues rhythm pattern, sometimes known as the chop, which looks like this. So you can play this in either open position on the A chord here, but I'm going to demonstrate using the power chord here so you can play it in any key. So we're using our first finger on the root note of A here, 5th fret of the low E string, and then second finger on the A string, 2 frets up, so at the 7th fret there on the A string, which is the 5th in our power chord. So now we've got this. Then we just use our little finger to come on and off at the 9th fret on the A string for extra movement, and I'm going to count it as 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. With that little finger coming on the 2 and 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Now, many people will already know this pattern, so I've got something a little more sophisticated to show you shortly. But back to straight versus swing. Now playing like this is a straight rhythm. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. All notes equal length. Same, 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 same. Now there's music like 50s rock and roll, which often uses a straight rhythm but overlaps hugely with blues. But for true blues, we need swing, a long, short rhythm. Long, short, long, short, long, short, long, short. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So what's actually going on in this swing rhythm is each beat is being divided into 3, known as triplets, and the long part lasts for 2 of these notes and the short for 1. So we could count it like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But that's a little bit complex, so it's easier to think of it as long, short, long, short, long, short, long, short. But knowing there are 3 notes here will become really invaluable when we get onto soloing later. Now before we move on, didn't we say earlier that all these chords can be played as a 7? With this chop pattern, we can add the 7th by stretching up 1 more fret with the little finger like this. So now we're up to the 10th with that little finger. So let's alternate between going on to the 9th and going on to the 10th with it. Now that's a blues sound we all know. Then of course we can move this pattern to any chord, like up to the D here, up to the E. Now let's talk about chord progressions, and most blues is based around a structure we call 12-bar blues. A simple but very common version of the 12-bar blues would look like this. 4 bars on the 1 chord, 2 bars on the 4 chord, then 2 on the 1 again, 5 chord for 2 bars, 2 bars on the 1 to end. Now this can be looped for as long as you desire. You will see variations on this. In particular, it's common to play some quicker changes in the last 4 bars. So when we get to that 5 chord, we could play it for 1 bar, then down to the 4 chord, back to the 1 chord, ending on that 5 chord, as this gives a really strong turnaround back to the next round. Pro tip for anyone thinking, yes, I know all this already, well try making bar 6 a diminished chord, a half step up from the 4 chord. So if your 4 chord is a D, try moving up to a D sharp diminished for 1 bar and it'll sound great. Not all blues follows a 12-bar pattern, but this is by far the most common structure. So now we know what chords to play, let's look at that more sophisticated rhythm pattern I promised earlier. So take your E-shaped bar chord, and remember we can take the little finger off to make it a 7 chord. But one more thing we can do to make this sound even more bluesy is hammer on with the 2nd finger on the G string like this. This hammer on there creates a minor to major movement, a fundamental part of the blues sound. So now we're going to keep this, but play only the notes on the D, G and B strings, and play it like this, as a little bar at the 5th fret with the 1st finger, D, G and B strings, and then hammer on to the 6th fret just on the G string. Then what we can do is play another bar at the 7th fret with our 3rd finger, those same 3 strings, the D, G and B strings, and now alternate between this bar with the little hammer on and this bar, and we get a sound something like this. Now, that's a really classic blues sound. So then we can move that up, if you imagine a D7 up here, that same technique in this position, and the E chord. Now there's lots of different rhythms you can use with this, but this kind of technique between the 1 chord with that hammer on and this little bar, which is really a 4 chord, this is a really classic blues sound. Now this works really well in a band where you don't need that low root note, but a pro tip for the more advanced players, you can get your thumb over the top to play this root note on the low E. And that's really useful when you're playing on your own. Now let's just recap what we've learned so far. So, most blues is based around 1, 4 and 5 chords. You can play all of these chords as a 7, Blues is usually played with a swing rhythm, and the 12-bar blues progression is the most common chord structure. So once you've got all this down, you're basically ready to go as a blues rhythm player. So let me play once round a 12-bar and just listen out for all these concepts in action. Now it's time to move on to part 2, scales and solos, and we're going to work our way to a solo like this. So let's talk about the most important scale, as you might guess, the blues scale. Now the blues scale is simply the pentatonic scale with one special note added. So first let's remind ourselves what the pentatonic scale looks like. So here it is in A minor in its classic first position, starting on this root note of A here at the 5th fret on the low E. Now you can play this scale in lots of positions across the guitar neck, but we'll stick with this one here as that's what most people will know. Now to turn this into the blues scale, we're just going to add one more note, the blue note. And the first place we can find the blue note is here. 8th fret on the G string, just outside of our A minor pentatonic shape. We can just slide over to it like that, and as soon as I hit on that note, the blues sound really comes through. The other place we can find the blue note within our A minor pentatonic shape is here at the 6th fret on the A string. Now the blue note is a flat 5, an E flat in the case of A minor. It's a chromatic note that doesn't really belong, so the key is to use it sparingly to add flavour. Okay, so now we understand what the blues scale pattern looks like, but how do we actually use it? Well, shortly I'm going to give you some great licks to play, but first let's just cover some essential knowledge so you'll understand how these licks are built. The most common place to start with blues soloing is by playing the minor blues scale over a major chord progression. So in the key of A major, we can actually play the A minor blues scale over the top, and this creates a super bluesy sound. You know, that kind of a vibe. And then when we move up to the 4 chord of D and the 5 chord of E, we're still going to be playing that same A minor blues scale. Probably the most important part of learning to use this scale is understanding where the root notes fall. So with our A minor blues scale shape, we've got a root note of A, firstly here, 5th fret on the low E string, the first note of our pattern, and then here, 7th fret on the D string, the second note of the pattern on that string, and then again of course here, 5th fret on the high E string as well. So we've got 3 different A's within that shape. Now not all, but many of your licks will resolve back to one of these root notes, and this really makes your playing feel like it fits within the key, especially important when you're using out of key notes from the minor blues scale. Pro tip, the next level up is to blend notes from the major scale together simultaneously with this minor blues scale. And this hugely increases your options. I call this blend the double blues scale, and there's a link to a tutorial below. String bending is possibly the most essential technique for blues soloing, and there's 3 really important bends to get to grips with. Firstly, in our blues scale shape, the first note on the G string here, you want to be able to give this a little bend up. Because this is the minor third, as in this A minor here, it can really grate against the major third in an A major chord. So just this slight push up, just slightly sharp, makes it more palatable, but also invokes a quality similar to how vocalists bend into a note. Secondly, we want to get confident at bending the second note on the G string here. Now we can bend this up a full step, the equivalent of 2 frets higher, or we can bend it just a half step to get up to this blue note 1 fret higher. Then lastly we want to bend this note here the flat 7 at the 8th fret on the B string up a full step, equivalent of 2 frets, which gets us to our root note of A. See, it's the same as this note here. And because of this, this is often a really good bend to use to end a phrase. Pro tip on bending, more advanced players will find some extra blues juice along the way in these bends, so going slow can really work. Along with pre-bending before picking and releasing. So in a moment I'm going to break down some licks and give you a solo to end with, but first let's just recap what we've learned about blues lead playing, because you'll see all of this coming through in that solo. So the blues scale is just a pentatonic scale with one extra note added, a flat 5. We can use the minor blues scale over a major chord progression. Resolving to root notes is important to make our licks feel grounded, and there are 3 essential bends that really add that blues feel. So now we understand the building blocks, let's get into those licks. So our first lick goes like this. So we're starting here at the 7th fret on the G string with a full bend up. Then what we're going to do with that same finger is just slide from 8 back to 7. So we're just flicking off this blue note here at the 8th fret, straight after the bend. And then pull off to the 5th fret on the G string, and then it's down to the 7th fret on the D string, our root note of A. So all together so far. And then back to fret 5 on the G string. Just that little push sharp on there, and then back to our root note of A again. So all together. One of the beauties of a lick like this is this first bend you can play multiple times before then going on to perform the rest of the lick. So first time I could just play it once. Then what about 3 times? So just by mixing it up like that, you get quite a lot of mileage out of a lick like this. Then for our second lick we have this. So again, we're starting here at the 7th fret of the G string with this full bend up. And then it's fret 5 on the B string, and then let that ring out and play fret 5 on the high E, and then again fret 5 on the B. So we've got these 2 notes ringing together. And then it's just fret 8 on the B string, that big full bend up to the root note. Then again with this lick, we can repeat this first part as many times as we like before ending on the big bend. Our third lick is based around this lower blue note here at the 6th fret on the A string. So all I'm doing, starting at that 6th fret on the A string, hammer on to 7, and then 5th fret on the D string. Repeat that as many times as I like. And this is what I mentioned earlier, this triplet feel is really important because we're playing 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So just to round off there, I'm just playing 7 on the D, little bend up with 5 on the G, and then back to 7 on the D, like we saw kind of in the first lick. But really, you could go on for as long as you like. Now take a listen to this solo and see how it's made up of just these 3 licks. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and it was useful for you. Of course, what we covered today is just the basics, but once you've got these concepts down, then there's a whole world of blues to discover. Anyway, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.